What is going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another action-packed edition of Touchline Talk. One of the things I absolutely love about this sport from a U.S. but also European fan and media member standpoint is that unlike every other sport, soccer doesn't end. It just keeps going because of the way that MLS lines up with the European season, and so the European domestic seasons come to an end. But all of a sudden, we haven't finished the Champions League, so we're going to get to watch Champions League for the next couple weeks, and then MLS comes back again, and the Premier League and all of the other European leagues are already getting ready to go in a month or so. We're already counting down the days to the start of the new domestic seasons in Europe. Even in this pandemic and the chaos it's caused to the schedule, we still always have soccer to talk about, which is just something that I try not to take for granted, and it's absolutely amazing about this sport that there's just always something. And then you have the transfer rumors and transfer windows on top of that, but there's always things happening. There are always games to watch, which is just absolutely fantastic. And I was just reminded of that again as we got into the Champions League and the best of the best playing against each other for the ultimate prize in club competition in this sport. Well, also MLS is announcing its plan to continue playing once their tournament in Orlando is done. It's just a wonderful thing. There's always soccer going on. It makes me very happy. We're going to get right to it, though. We got a lot to cover today. Another really good edition of the Supporters Corner, talking primarily about the Champions League. Don't want to spoil too much about that yet, but as always, we start with our first five, and there is nowhere else to start except for what has already happened with the Champions League getting back underway. We have our quarterfinalists. We're going to start Saturday and go backward. I mean, there's not much to say. Bayern Munich dismantled Chelsea 7-1 on aggregate. It was over before this leg was played, and Bayern had an incentive to actually get their guys back on the field and get some real minutes underneath them because they haven't played in a little while. So it wasn't like they were just sending out the C squad. Lewandowski does his thing. He's been as good as any player in this tournament. Chelsea was already struggling with some injuries, and there was just no hope that this was going to go any other way. Still a very good season for Frank Lampard, but this is about Bayern, and Bayern just continuing to look as good as anybody in the world. And then Barcelona finds a way to get past Napoli, 4-2 on aggregate. They got 3 goals in the first half. Messi was absolutely phenomenal. This is one of those weird things where, as bad as Barcelona have been most of this season, and the questions that I still continue to have and the issues Messi has with the board and just the uncertainty of where this team goes moving forward, you can still get a performance like that from Messi on any given day and beat any team in the world. This is still Barcelona. This is still Lionel Messi. And he reminded you of that again with that phenomenal performance. It was never really in doubt. They jumped on it early, got an unexpected goal from the center back, and then Messi took over and did his thing. So Barcelona are also through. They're setting up that matchup with Bayern, which is going to be sensational. I don't like their chances, but like I said, Messi's on their team. That means there's always a possibility. And we'll talk more about that as that game gets closer. But yeah, it was just pure Messi. It was brilliant to watch. Then we go backward, and Barcelona's arch nemesis, Real Madrid, knocked out by Manchester City, 4-2 on aggregate, 2 wins for City over the 2 legs. They were the better team. This is the first time Zinedine Zidane has ever gotten knocked out of the Champions League, which is really strange to think about and just an incredible factoid. But then you think about it, and he turned Real Madrid into this European juggernaut and then left when things got bad and then came back, and he hasn't had the ability to turn this around again yet. But really the story of this game was Rafael Varane, who has been so solid. And, Sergio Ramos gets the headlines in that defense because he is very much the heart and soul of Real Madrid, particularly now that Ronaldo is no longer there. And I've never seen anything like those 2 mistakes Varane made. That was tough to watch. I don't know what happened. And he took responsibility and said that loss is on him. I'm still not sure they actually do enough to go through if he doesn't make those 2 mistakes. But if there's a guy you're looking at on that team not to make those kind of mistakes and to be as reliable as anybody through this stretch, he's just quietly been that other center back. And he just had a real rough go of it. And Manchester City is always going to pounce. That's part of what Gabriel Jesus does. He's going to put pressure on you. He's going to make you make the right decision, and Varane couldn't do it. And this is also part of the risk of having Sergio Ramos as your other center back, your captain. He has it's not exactly a secret. He picks up a lot of yellow and red cards. He gets himself suspended, and he puts you in a situation where he might not be available for these kind of games when you really need him. He probably handles those situations a little bit differently. That's not an excuse for Varane, because both of them should be better than this. But that's part of what comes with the Sergio Ramos experience, is knowing that you might not have him in a game like this, and it could come back to bite you. But I don't think Zidane really should be that upset about this or that frustrated. It was a poor performance, but Manchester City's just a better team right now. Even without Sergio Aguero, they are just a better team. And so now you won a league if you're Real Madrid, which is something that's important that they hadn't done in a while. So you rebuild going forward, and you just sort of figure out who's staying, who's going, what Zidane wants. They could be right back in the thick of this thing next year, but it's just a reminder of the work that Zidane has to do. This is not the same team that he was able to inherit and then take to the pinnacle of the sport. There are real questions across the board. And the final point, sort of moving into Juventus, we'll get to Juventus here in a second, but you're seeing a sort of changing of the guard, and the last part of that was Juventus falling to Lyon on away goals. They won the second leg 2-1, but it wasn't enough. To me, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in the supporters' corner, you're looking at Liverpool, Manchester City, and Bayern Munich, and they are just a step ahead of everybody right now. In the past decade or so, that has been Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus, consistently making the quarterfinals, semifinals, final of this tournament. And all three are facing real questions right now. It just wasn't quite good enough from Juventus. Ronaldo got a really nice goal back to make things interesting. The other thing I do want to say, though, those were some strange penalties that got called, and if you take both penalties away, it goes to a shootout. That's how Lyon got through on away goals, was that Memphis Depay got to take that penalty. It didn't matter on the scoreline because both teams got a strange penalty that I'm not sure why it was given. But you put yourself in that position when you lose the away leg and you don't score an away goal. So, yeah, Juventus has a little bit of a right to be frustrated with the refereeing there, but at the end of the day, they both caught a break, and they were decent on the field. But I said this, before. It's been a story all season. Mauricio Sarri just never got this team going. He never got this team to buy into what he was trying to do. This is not the same Juventus as even a couple years ago. Ronaldo has not taken this team to the next level and gotten over that hump where you're not just making the semifinals or making the Champions League final, you're actually winning it. That's what he was brought to Turin to do. And they're taking a step back. And so that's really what stood out to me about this round of 16 overall. And I talked about this in my 5 things of the week at 110sportsmedia.com. There is a clear top tier right now, and it is not what we have expected and seen over the past decade of Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus dominating this competition. All three can turn this around quickly because they're three of the biggest clubs in the world and they have money to spend. You saw what Bayern did in a very short period of time by changing managers and just sort of hitting the restart button. They went from being in the same situation where they, you weren't shocked to see him lose in a round of 16 or quarterfinals under Niko Kovac, and he got fired because they weren't good enough in Europe. That's kind of where these other teams are right now, but Bayern immediately turned it around and now is as good as anybody in the world again. This can happen, but I think in the short term, you've really seen a changing of the guard, and you have a new top tier in Europe. And it's Liverpool, Manchester City, and Bayern, at least for next season, until somebody can knock them off and make this more interesting again. They don't have the same questions that these other teams do. There's a lot of work to be done at Juventus, a lot of work to be done at Real Madrid, and a lot of work to be done at Barcelona. And only Barcelona is still alive in this competition, which is pretty incredible to think about. So I don't want to get too much into it, but you've got your quarterfinals now. We're going to do extensive previews, so I'm not going to say any more right now. But the response from Juventus to this disappointing defeat to Lyon was to fire Mauricio Sarri and hire Andrea Pirlo. Andrea Pirlo was hired as Juventus' U23 coach on July 30th. He has not managed a professional game in any way, shape, or form, but he's going to go take Juventus over next season. And the question with Pirlo is not tactical acumen. He has a terrific soccer mind, and that's a very obvious statement. Part of his game was just understanding what's happening on the field and being able to see everything. The questions I have, aside from just can he actually manage, are sort of twofold. One, can he actually communicate that information and what he's seeing and what he wants to his players? There is something when you get into this higher level of talent, it's sort of the Michael Jordan, LeBron James thing of they don't really want to coach because you can't teach some of the things that they can do. And I feel like to a certain extent Pirlo is in that category. That can he actually take all of the things that made him a great player and pass those on to the players he's now in charge of? I'm not saying the answer is no, but I think it's a fair question to ask. Is he actually capable of utilizing his intelligence in a way that actually makes his players better, other than just him being able to see what's going on and knowing what he wants to do? Can he actually make it happen? The second question is, can he get this dressing room, these players, to buy into him and to change the culture and the tone at Juventus right now? Because that was Mauricio Sarri's problem. He just didn't have the buy-in that he needed from these players. It never felt like everybody was pulling in the same direction. And now Ronaldo's at least reportedly considering leaving for PSG. But Pirlo is the kind of guy that I feel like you would want to play for, that he has that Frank Lampard-esque quality where you feel good about the idea of him being your manager. But at the same time, he's just never done this before. They're clearly trying to find the next Zinedine Zidane, the next Pep Guardiola, the next Frank Lampard. I'm not putting Lampard in that category yet, but the same idea of hiring that, and Mikel Arteta as well. You're seeing this trend of hiring these former players to come in, provide just sort of a fresh perspective, and sticking to the identity of these clubs and these guys who have served them so well and know what it means to play at Barcelona, Real Madrid, Juventus, Chelsea, Arsenal, that fit the culture. And so you're trying to sort of go back to the good old days by bringing in somebody who was part of that. And it's just the law of averages. One of these guys is going to fail. The jury is very much still out in Arteta and Lampard, but it's not to the point where you have any real questions about their abilities. Lampard's got a different challenge now because he's playing in Europe, where Arteta's, and particularly the Champions League, Arteta's still in a rebuilding project. But, one of these I think is going to turn into a rather catastrophic disaster. And maybe that's a little extreme, but I don't think all these are going to go swimmingly. And so you might strike out and all of a sudden Pirlo, it's just not working and you've put yourself back that much farther, as opposed to going and getting, for example, a Mauricio Pochettino. I was very surprised Juventus moved this fast to go get Pirlo without even having a conversation about Pochettino. Because to me, that's the kind of job he looks at and goes, I'm interested, I want that project. That's where I would have gone. But I get the Pirlo idea, it might work. It's just very strange. We'll see. I have questions, but Juventus is sort of at the point where they need to do something different. They need to hit the restart button and to not just sort of try and bring somebody else in to paper over the cracks. They need an overhaul, and bringing in somebody like Pirlo may actually be the solution to that. Thirdly, Europa League. The best two teams remaining, Manchester United, Inter Milan, both go through to the semifinals. Inter get 2 early goals and hang on against Bayer Leverkusen. just basically gave Leverkusen the ball, hit him on the counter. Pretty convincing. Had 2 penalties that got taken away, rightfully so. But they had it was a good performance. And Kai Havertz scored Leverkusen's goal. I want to mention this real quickly. And maybe the last game he plays for the club, so it'd be a nice way to go out if he does indeed move to Chelsea. And Romelu Lukaku was really good again. He's quietly had a phenomenal season for Inter. I continue to say that this team's as good as anybody left in this competition. There's a reason that they finished second in Serie A. They're going to cause some trouble, and I absolutely like them to get to the final in this tournament. Was not as pretty for Manchester United. They get a Bruno Fernandes penalty in extra time. Although, in fairness, I mean, Copenhagen's goalkeeper, Janssen, was phenomenal. Copenhagen just sort of held in there defensively. He stood on his head, and they kept this thing 0-0 through 90 minutes. By the end, you could just tell that they were not able to hold this together anymore. Manchester United just kept coming at them. They were going to score a goal at some point. It wasn't exactly threatening once they got that goal. From Copenhagen's perspective, they didn't do all that much to really cause any concern for Manchester United about giving up an equalizer. And part of that was just because Anthony Martial just started running through people. He had a really, really solid end to this game. When people got tired, he just kept going, slaloming through Copenhagen's defense. This United team's good, and that's the kind of game you got to find a way to win. It wasn't the prettiest thing in the world, but they got through. And I do really like them to come out of the other side of this bracket. We'll see who they end up playing. It's going to be a stiffer competition in the next round. But, it's not going to be beautiful and pretty every single game. So the ability of this team, who's been playing so well and playing such attractive soccer, to be able to get an ugly win like this, I almost feel like it's a positive. Not only, of course, at this point you take any win you can get, but that it's more than just, well, they found a way to win. You actually feel good about getting this kind of win, because then you're just more confident if you end up in a situation like this again, which could very well happen in this kind of tournament, where teams beside United, who already are into the Champions League next season, have a much larger incentive to try and win. The teams are going to be coming after them and have absolutely an incentive to win this thing and try and get in the Champions League next season. So it was a good test that United handled fairly well, just dealing with some adversity and things not going perfectly. So they're both through. And then we also didn't get to talk about Thursday's quarterfinals. So Basel, Wolves, Sevilla are all through as well. We'll talk about them a little bit more in what's next at the end here. But that's your situation in the Europa League. Over in MLS, Orlando City has done it. They take down Minnesota United, so they are playing Portland in the MLS's back final tonight. Again, we're going to get more in depth in that and what's next. But really the story of this game, Minnesota was honestly the better team for most of it. But this is the kind of thing you can do when Nani's on your team. You get Nani isolated twice against Hassani Dotson in a 10-minute span, and you get 2 goals out of it. Now, I am really high on Hassani Dotson. I said that coming into this game, that he's very quietly making a case to be a part of this U.S. men's national team, at least consideration moving into the future, because he's still so young. But that was rough. He was not ready for Nani. And you see that he's still got plenty of work to do. And Taylor Twellman made the case, and I think I agree, he's better in central midfield than he is at right back or left back. But that was the situation, because of the injury to Metnair, Minnesota had to play him there. And this is really about Nani, though. You're going to have those moments with young defenders. Nani's just capable of making that kind of difference. And so you get those 2 goals. Minnesota come back. Mason Toye scores 1. It almost got away from Orlando. Minnesota never gave up on this thing, and they continued to be dangerous. But then you get that one moment, you get your break, Michel puts it away, and that's the game Orlando goes through. They they've been really good this tournament. They're scoring goals at a high level. They're attacking well. This is going to be a very, very interesting matchup tonight against Portland. I'm excited to see how these two teams that are rather different stylistically match up against each other. It's sort of the opposite of that Portland-Philadelphia matchup in the semis where they were pretty much the same team and it was a question of which one got to do their thing more. So, I've got plenty more to say on that, but we're going to save that for what's next. Our fifth thing. I don't like talking about transfer rumors because there's so much uncertainty. I don't believe them until I see them, generally speaking, which I think is a good policy for everybody following this sport to practice. But there are certain situations where I feel confident enough to say something. And this Jadon Sancho development at Dortmund is one of them. When Dortmund come out and say publicly he's not leaving, I find it hard to believe that they're going to back down from that. That very much felt, not only was it literally stated as a final decision, it felt like one. And I know Paul Pogba's now apparently going to make some announcement tomorrow. Who knows what's going on there. But I think it's safe to say that Jadon Sancho is staying at Borussia Dortmund this season. I would just be stunned if Dortmund changed their mind and let him go after being that public about wanting to keep him and saying he's staying. So a couple things from United's perspective here. One, this allows them to spend that money in positions that they actually need. Of course, there's the appeal of Jadon Sancho because he's English, because he's one of the best young attackers in the world. He makes your team better, absolutely. But that front three they have is already really good. And theoretically, you're taking time away from Mason Greenwood and Marcus Rashford if you bring in Jadon Sancho. There's just too many attacking players when you want to have Bruno Fernandes in your midfield because he made your team exponentially better. There's only so much space in the attacking third of the field to have all of these guys. And so, of course, if Jadon Sancho is offered to you, you say yes, but this could actually be a blessing in disguise for United that you can go get yourself another center back. Go get yourself a left back. Go get yourself another holding midfielder to eventually replace Nemanja Matic. You've got options now that you can solidify this team even more instead of just adding to the spot where you're already strongest. And the other thing is that even if United brought in Sancho, they're still probably a year away. I mean, they're so young. And the pressure that you're going to face from Manchester City and Liverpool, I'm just not sure that you can look at this and expect them to make that kind of jump from a poor first half of the season and an excellent second half to being that good all season long to compete with the likes of City and Liverpool. So if you, theoretically, you go get another couple pieces, you put together a really good season, finish third or something, look much more consistent, more like the team we've seen these past couple months since the restart, and then you bring in Jadon Sancho on top of that next summer, then you're talking about something, because who knows what Liverpool looks like at that point, who knows where Manchester City is. I mean, of course they're going to be good, but this almost might work out better for United, that he's not coming right now, because they just, honestly, they don't need him. That's where I am on that. I don't think he's going right now. Of course, there's always the chance that if you don't get this deal done, Real Madrid, Barcelona, somebody else pops up and snags him. But I just feel like he wants United. United wants him. I think this still probably happens eventually. So I would not go breaking the bank and being desperate to pull this off at this particular moment if I'm Manchester United. I bide my time. It's not like he's going to stay at Dortmund forever. There's always that opportunity to make that deal later. I'm going to focus on the rest of this team and trying to build as complete a squad as I can to go into the Champions League next season feeling like, again, like I said, I feel like all four of those teams, you throw Chelsea in that mix too, feel like they're coming into next season with a chance to compete for a league title and to compete for a Champions League. You got to go fill out your rosters if you're Chelsea and Manchester United, though, and not spending that incredible amount of money on Jadon Sancho probably helps United, So that's where I am on that. Those are our first five. We're going to take our first break. And when we come back, we're going into the Supporters Corner with one of my absolute favorite people in the entire world of soccer media. You're not going to want to miss that. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to Touchline Talk. We're switching our Supporters Corner interview this week. We are making it Tuesday rather than Thursday because I wanted to have this specific person, and I wanted to have this specific person on Tuesday, today, to talk about the Champions League quarterfinals before they started. So joining us in the Supporters Corner this week is JJ Devaney, co-host of Caught Offside. It's an ESPN podcast. I can't say enough good things about this podcast. I've been listening for years. He and Andrew Gudling do a terrific job. They cover basically the same things I cover on this show. Everything from MLS to Champions League, Premier League, all that good stuff. So I wanted to have JJ on to get his thoughts as a Liverpool fan, lifelong Liverpool fan, what he sort of sees the legacy of that team, and the team that finally broke the curse and got that Premier League trophy, as well as the Champions League, what he's looking for, both his thoughts on what's happened in the round of 16, what he's looking forward to in the quarterfinals, and a little bit of MLS discussion, who he thinks is going to win tonight at the end. But without further ado, here's our interview with Caught Offside co-host JJ Devaney. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here today, JJ. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thanks. So the first thing, I feel like I would just be remiss if we didn't talk a little Liverpool, having you on here with just your connection to the club. So the question I want to ask you is just, now that you're a little bit removed from this title, obviously it's still very fresh in your mind, but now that you've had a little time to reflect, what do you think the legacy of this team is? Where does it stack up in your mind against the greatest Premier League teams of all time? How important do you think not quite getting that points record was? Just sort of, where do you see this team now that you're at least able to take a little bit of a step back from just the excitement of actually winning the Premier League?
I think, first of all, you need to put it in a Liverpool context, and I think it's one of the best Liverpool teams that's ever taken the field. There's no question. I think if you look at the teams in the 80s and you look at the teams in the 70s, this team stacks up. Maybe there's not as many. I was going to say there's not as many legendary players, but again, that happens over a period of time. And I think very soon we're going to look back at the likes of Salah, Sadio Mane, Roberto Firmino, and even Jordan Henderson as captain, and Virgil van Dijk. This team, I mean, just going through it, is absolutely loaded. And not even talking about the fullbacks who are going to be, like, it's interesting. I've seen a lot of people who are making their all-time Liverpool 11s, doing little things like that, having fun with it. And I mean, right now it's hard not to put the fullbacks in. In terms of legacy, in terms of the Premier League, I think they're right up there as well. I think the main legacy of this team is kind of their ability to have gone 2 seasons at a pace against the most lavishly constructed football team in English football history, even maybe European football history, in Manchester City. To be able to go toe-to-toe with them for 2 seasons and win out in the second season was something incredible. And also I'd thrown in a European Cup, a World Club Cup championship in the middle of that attempt to win a league is unbelievable. But I actually don't think we're far enough away from this team to really assess its legacy. Sometimes you need to see a team break up or move on, or for changes to be made before you go back and can really appreciate how good that team was. But this is a team that's been in genesis for 3 years. And it was interesting listening to what Klopp said last season, that he felt it was the beginning. It was their first chance, not their last chance. Their first of many chances to win a league. And for them to do it at the second attempt, like, they weren't really in contention. Maybe they were the season before for a little while, but yeah, it's incredible. Again, you can probably tell I'm struggling to really put the legacy into words right now, and because I genuinely think it's going to take longer than a few weeks or even a few months. But I would say in the future we'll be looking back at this team as one of the greats of the Premier League era, and as one of the great Liverpool sides, full stop.
Yeah, and that's a very valid point there, right? We can't completely figure out what this team means until you see what happens in the future and you're removed for it. I was just sort of curious if, that little bit extra reflection. Moving on to sort of Champions League, what happened in the round of 16, I want to talk about Juventus and what's happened there. But was there anything watching these games that particularly stood out to you, or that you think sort of stole the headlines as we go, finishing up from this restart and just getting the Champions League back underway?
Probably today, and again, this is recency bias from today's game, because the Chelsea and Bayern Munich game that was pretty much done going into it, and,
right.
and Chelsea didn't do anything to try and make that a game, not really. From Barcelona and Napoli, I think Messi set his stall out at the end of the La Liga season in pretty stark terms, and talked about how weak he felt his teammates were, and the whole team was in general. And for him to put in such a brilliant performance against Napoli today was really something. And while Barcelona aren't perfect, they're in a quarter-final now. And they're in a quarter-final. It's probably not the draw they would have wanted against Bayern Munich, but they're there. And I don't know. Maybe they don't make it through, but I just thought that Messi's performance today was the standout from these round of games. I also thought Real Madrid were so poor yesterday. It was really disappointing. I was surprised he started Hazard. I thought they found in the midst of that bombardment from Manchester City, I thought they found a way to get at City with Rodrigo down the right, and they just didn't do it enough in the second half. And even still, if City had taken all their chances in that first half, it would have been much more embarrassing, particularly embarrassing for Rafa, for Varane and his performance. Just those mistakes. But yeah, I thought Zidane would have schemed a bit more. I thought they'd play a bit more direct. I'm not saying suddenly you turn Real Madrid into a long ball team, but that was a makeshift centre-half pairing that Manchester City had out there, and I thought they might have exploited it a little bit more. Maybe looked at what Arsenal did in the Cup semi-final and thought there's a blueprint for playing against them, and they didn't. So Real Madrid being poor, Juventus going out when they did and reacting the way they did by sacking Sarri, that's a big story. And then installing Andrea Pirlo, very big story as well. But from today, I guess it's Messi, and just reminding us again how great he is.
Yeah, what are your just initial reactions to Pirlo and the idea that it didn't seem like there was even a conversation with Mauricio Pochettino or people like that it was, very much, it seemed like this was in place with how quickly they made that decision. And
yeah. Look, I wouldn't pretend to have any particular insight into what's going on in Turin. So I don't have contacts on the ground there. I don't really know the machinations of the Agnellis, but on the face of it, if you look at it, Pirlo was installed as the under-23 captain, and he's suddenly promoted without, I don't think he managed a game. Not one game at under-23 level. So this feels to me a little bit like, the way they say the NFL is a copycat league. So suddenly if you've got certain things are happening in that league, with one team, then other teams are going to try and copy that. And it's almost like a football by numbers. And I honestly think the hierarchy in Juventus have looked at it and they've said, let's promote from within. It worked at Bayern Munich recently with Hansi Flick. It's worked in the past at Barcelona with Pep Guardiola. It's worked with Zinedine Zidane at Real Madrid. Let's give it a go. Here's this legendary ex-player. Let's put him in. I know Hansi Flick wasn't a legendary ex-player for Bayern Munich, but just let's throw him in and hope for the best. And it's such a gamble. It's incredible. I don't know anything about Pirlo as a coach. I don't know anything about, how dedicated he was to getting his coaching badges. And I mean, it's not the same as Pep Guardiola, who made his way through the ranks of Barcelona. It's not the same as Zidane. And it just feels like they're trying to capture this lightning in a bottle for their own Juventus version of that. And it's curious. But again, there's a piece I read by Jonathan Wilson in The Observer last weekend where he kind of suggested that at super clubs like Juventus, these decisions, maybe they don't matter. There's so much money there. Maybe they can win the league they won it with an imperfect team under Sarri this season. Right. Maybe they can do that again. Worst case scenario, they do that and they don't get, it doesn't work out. They just get a new manager. Maybe for these clubs with all this money, the stakes really aren't that high anymore. So but on the face of it, not a great decision.
And when you look at this sort of generally what's happened in the round of 16, right? So Juventus has got all kinds of questions and is doing something that nobody is sure is going to work. Barcelona, yes, looked really good. Messi was magical. There's always a chance, but there are obviously a lot of questions there just with the board and what happens moving forward. You watching Real Madrid, very strange performance from Varane and just disappointing overall. Do you feel like, because to me, those three teams sort of have epitomized the Champions League over the past decade or so.
Sure.
And of course, there's always the opportunity that you get a couple good signings in or something happens and all of a sudden you're right back in the semifinals or final next year.
Very true.
But do you feel like there's sort of a changing of the guard, at least on a temporary basis here, where you're looking at Liverpool, Bayern Munich, Manchester City, some of the, these teams are all of the same caliber. They're all super clubs, but it just seems like this competition has belonged to those three teams more than anybody else. And they're all just facing some real questions right now.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, but not just in terms of the structures of the clubs or the unique problems that each one of those clubs you mentioned are having. Just in the fact, like, it's the passage of time. It's just things are moving on. Messi's performance was brilliant tonight, and he seems to be at least capable in most aspects of his game to defy time. But the other players in that team are all, the Rakitiches and the PKs are, into their 30s now. And that's the same at Real Madrid. When you look at this team, it's a team kind of in transition a little bit too as well. It's you might be right. We may see Munich and Liverpool and City. I don't know if they're going to dominate it in quite the way that Real Madrid did or that Barcelona did for a little while, but maybe that's what's happening. I don't know. Only time will tell. But a little bit of it for me is just simply the passage of time. It's very hard to do what Real Madrid did season on season in the Champions League. It's difficult, and especially considering where the power shift has been, where you've seen Ronaldo, who drove so much of that success, move on. And as good as Benzema is, I think we kind of saw last night that maybe he doesn't have the help around him that he needs. But you could be right. We'll see. But it'll take maybe another couple of seasons before we can say. And again, like you said, and rightly stated, couple of signings here or there, and suddenly these clubs are back at it. So we'll see.
Right, and Bayern Munich's a perfect example of that. They were sort of in this place the last couple of years, and then all of a sudden you get your manager change, some new confidence, and they're right back among the best teams in the world. So now moving forward, looking at these quarterfinal matchups, is there one that you find most intriguing or most interesting?
I've got a hunch that if it starts badly early in the Atalanta PSG game, and when I mean it starts badly for PSG, that could be a shock. Now, Ilicic not being involved, that's going to be a problem, I would think, for Atalanta. But I just wonder about PSG. It's the constant, and they're absolutely stacked with talent. I accept that, but they have weaknesses. They can be exploited, and the way Atalanta play, I mean, they came so close to scoring 100 goals in Serie A this season, which is this is incredible for a club their size. That one intrigues me because Gasparini's ability to have different styles of play within a game and to change formations and to just to be so innovative and attack minded is really, I mean, it gives me great hope that the clubs in the Champions League, that we're not completely lost to this idea that it's soon going to be like this PSG, Man City, Liverpool, Bayern Munich, Juventus, Real Madrid, just those teams occupying the top spaces. So that one fascinates me. And also, Bayern Munich looked so good at times during the Bundesliga restart and kind of played in a style that even under Pep Guardiola, I never really enjoyed them. Those seasons, after they won the Champions League in the final against Dortmund, and then Pep came in, I never really enjoyed watching them. And they weren't great under Kovac, fair enough, didn't really work out. But how quickly Hansi Flick has got them working, and they're actually really enjoyable to watch. And I wonder what they'll be able to do against Barcelona. That could actually be a really great game. That could be a really great tie. So I suppose those two stand out for me. I'm assuming Manchester City will go through Lyon. I'm sure they'll have their shaky moments. It's been a team in the past that is, I believe, was it last season? They dropped points to Lyon home and away. But yeah, it's going to be interesting.
And I'm right with you with the Atalanta PSG thing. And the other thing I was curious about, not only do you have this team that just scores goals for fun at Atalanta, but how much of an impact do you think the fact that Atalanta's been playing at a high level in Serie A for multiple months now, and PSG's had one competitive game since March or whatever it was? How much in Lyon showed that it didn't really impact them all that much, but do you think that that's another factor, and how much of a factor do you think that is?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to lean on something I say regularly on the pod because I don't know. So it's rest versus just being in rhythm. So I'm going to lean on the fact I say you don't get better at doing something by not doing it. So PSG have not played many games at all of late. Is that going to lead to rust going into this? I know there was plenty. I'm sure they were involved in some kind of friendly matches that were played in France as well. But okay, let's just say maybe the rhythm of Atalanta, the fact that they have played up until very recently, I'm going to say maybe that gives them an advantage. Yeah, I'm going to go with that one. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know because I guarantee you after the game, the excuses will come out. If Atalanta lose, well, look, PSG had all that rest. Atalanta, the longest season in the club's history, blah, blah, blah. And vice versa if the other happens. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated from a scientific perspective that, right, this is just something we never get to see in that conversation about rest versus form and consistency and things like
Yeah.
that. But we've never seen anything like this before.
No, and I don't know how it works. I'm as, what was it they used to say on The Simpsons? I'm not a scientist, but I've never, I don't know how that works in terms of load. Like you think about how the top clubs pay attention to, lactic buildup and all those things. And they go into such detail in preseason. They're doing laps at Liverpool in particular. They're doing laps and then they're having their blood taken on the lap to see how much the players fall off in terms of their aerobic fitness. And it fascinates me. But this is so strange. The stop-start nature. You're playing flat out. You're at the crucial point in March and then you stop playing. And then there's a big gap. Now, Atalanta came back and played well in Serie A, but there's another shorter gap now. Does that impact them? Fascinating, really is.
And the other factor in here, do you think that there's a team that's particularly harmed or helped by the fact that this is on a temporary basis transition from your two legs, better team over 180 minutes to 90 minutes, one-off neutral
Football.
site. Yeah, do you think that particularly impacts one team more than the rest of them?
Yeah, I don't know. The fact there's no home and away, I don't know. I don't know. I think someone like say an underdog again like Atalanta, psychologically it'll be almost releasing for them. Just get out there. Here's our one shot. Go for it. And equally, I would say for Bayern Munich, the way that they play is so attack minded that they're just going to go for it. And there's no caution. There's no thought. Well, if something happens in this, we've got a second leg. There's none of that. The safety net's gone. Maybe it produces great football, like we saw in MLS once they released MLS from that kind of playoff two-legged scenario. We kind of saw a lot of good attack in football, and it could lead to great games. I think that's going to be the net positive from it.
And are you looking at this where I feel like it's wide open, but do you feel like there's a team that's at least a favorite or a couple teams you look at? The first two that come to mind are City and Bayern, of just being a step ahead of everybody, that feel like this is theirs to lose? Or do you think it really is up for grabs for all 8 teams?
The fact that it's one leg definitely impacts that, and it is, and gives it that up for grabs kind of feeling. But it's hard not to look at City and Bayern Munich. City in particular, the amount of chances they created the other night against Real Madrid, albeit Real Madrid helped them a little bit by, I think, they're the way the team was set up, and also by the fact that they had such bad errors. I still fancy City and Bayern Munich. They're the two best teams I've seen, and I'm just going to go on that.
If I had to tell you that somebody other than one of those two teams wins, who would it be?
Somebody other than Bayern Munich and Manchester City.
Yeah.
Ooh. I would say maybe Barcelona, but I would have a strong feeling that Atleti. Put it this way: when they had a job to do, and I mean it was far from perfect, but when they had a job to do at Anfield, their ability to get the goals that were needed and stop Liverpool was pretty impressive. I feel like the force of personality of a Diego Simeone in cup football in a one-leg game could be quite something. So I wouldn't write them off either. But Barcelona, one of the Spanish sides, Atleti or Barca, I would say, outside of those other two we talked about.
Gotcha. And then finally, just want to real quick get your thoughts. We've got 2 teams now playing for this MLS's back tournament that we're still not exactly sure what to make of. But what are your thoughts? Portland, Orlando, what interests you about this matchup? What do you think the keys are going to be, and who do you think is going to win?
Oh, wow. What interests me is if Diego Valeri, if we see him introduced and he goes to the well again. I mean, we're at the point where we don't expect him to start, and if he can go to the well again and along with Blanco kind of kickstart this Portland attack, and I wouldn't like betting against Portland in this scenario, but they're also facing on the other side a team that I like in terms of consistency and of playing a certain way. I haven't seen a team as good as Orlando. Orlando looked like they had 2 years to work with Oscar Pereira, not since. I know they've been working with him since December. That is a sizable amount of time, but considering the break and everything, they look really good. And Nani in form as well. Nani, Pereira, Moutinho. Yeah, I've backed Orlando all the way, so I'm gonna say Orlando are gonna do it. But again, Portland have a lot going for them too, and Savarese's done a good job in this tournament as well. I think actually, if you could have picked a final, seeing all the teams we've seen, maybe you'd want LAFC to advance because they're such a goal threat. But take them out of it. This is probably the final you would have wanted, and I am going to predict that they did look a little bit shaky at times against Minnesota, but I'm going to go. I'm going to say Orlando are going to do it. I'm just going to stick with Orlando, even though for most of the time I would in a final I would ordinarily go with Portland, but I think it could be a really good game.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, JJ. Always look forward to the podcast and just continue the great work.
Thanks very much, Joshua. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
And thanks once again to JJ Devaney for taking the time to come on the show. Really, really appreciate it. It was great to get to talk to him, meet him, get to know him a little bit. And we got to do that interview right after the Champions League games ended on Saturday, so we got instant reaction, which was really cool to see just JJ's initial thoughts on everything he had seen. And like I said, I can't recommend Caught Offside highly enough. I make it part of my routine every single week to make sure I catch that episode. It's part of my soccer intake, if you will, my information overload. So really, really appreciate JJ taking the time. We're going to take a second break. When we come back, it's What's Next, looking ahead to the Champions League quarterfinals, and tonight's showdown between Orlando and Portland. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, once again, to Touchline Talk, here on 110 Sports. We just had plenty of Champions League conversation, so naturally, it's time for more Champions League conversation. And we're just going to, actually, before we get to Champions League, we're going to go through today's games. My bad, forgot about that. So we're going to start Orlando, Portland, tonight. MLS is back, tournament final, whatever you want to call this thing. You got a decent amount on the line, $1.1 million, spot in the CONCACAF Champions League, and of course, just the idea that you get a trophy, which is particularly important for an Orlando team that has not done such a thing before in MLS. I wrote a piece for 110sportsmedia.com that's up as well as my 8 things to know about the Champions League quarterfinals that I wanted to touch on briefly a couple things here that I mentioned in that piece. My X factor in this game is Diego Valeri. Whether he starts or not, he's going to make an impact. Portland is more than capable of holding their own without him, and then you bring him on against the tired legs in the second half. You saw what he could do against NYCFC, how dangerous his corners were against Philly in the semifinals. He can't start every game, he can't play 90 minutes every game, but he is absolutely still capable of making an impact. And to me, he's pretty much the definition of an X factor. You know Nani's going to be the most important player for Orlando, him and Pereira, but you don't know exactly what you're going to get from Valeri, but he's absolutely the guy that can come. Orlando's bench is not all that spectacular, but if you're bringing Valeri, it just gives Portland a massive advantage if you can bring him off the bench, which probably has to do a lot with whether Jimmy Char is available to start or not. That sort of fits nicely with what Savarese wants to do and the pieces he's got available. So we'll see whether Valeri starts or not, but he's my X factor. Portland wins simply if the Timbers are able to play their game. I know that sounds cliche, but it's really true with this team. The way you cause an issue with what Portland's trying to do is you got to score the first goal and you got to score rather early. Portland wants Orlando to have the ball, and Orlando wants Orlando to have the ball, which makes this an interesting matchup from that perspective. If Orlando cannot really threaten Portland early, can't get the ball in the back of the net, make Portland think twice about sitting there and playing defense in their well-organized blocks, Orlando's going to have an incredibly tough time breaking them down. Because Portland is not only really good defensively, Portland is lethal on the counter. It's not like Portland's playing defense because they can't play offense. It's that their best offense is by transitioning from defense to offense really quickly. Getting the ball at Sebastian Blanco's feet. Letting Jeremy Obobisi make runs. It's all that stuff, and it starts with Diego Chara in the midfield and Eric Williamson being able to just destroy everything in their path and win tackle after tackle and win possession back and to go really quickly the opposite direction. So Portland is more than happy to absorb this pressure. So if they're able to sit back and hit Orlando on the counter and feel comfortable playing defense, they're going to win this game. On the flip side, Orlando wins if their defense is able to hold up against this pretty good Portland attack. And what I mean by that is you got to find a way, pretty much similar to Minnesota. Maybe you give up a goal here or there, but you can't have any massive mistakes. You've got to be really smart, because this is a newly made defense that basically all these pieces, except for John Matinho, have come in the last 18 months. This is a new look defense that finally these four guys are gelling. They've been really good. And that's been the difference for Orlando in this tournament, is that you've been good in attack and solid in defense. So you've got to find a way to make sure that Portland doesn't, and just on a simpler level, you can't let Portland get the first goal, because that's what happened against the Union, and I said it then and I'll say it again. It's going to happen to Orlando too. If you give Portland the first goal of this game, especially if it's a soft one, you're pretty much done for, because Portland's just going to sit there in their blocks and they're going to destroy you on the counter and soak up pressure. You got to find a way to just keep your team in this game, and if nothing else, keep it competitive enough that you can get another piece of late magic. Orlando has been phenomenal late in games in this tournament. They're scoring late goal after late goal. I think it's a different kind of challenge doing against Portland. But the Union got one. I mean, it's not out of the question. And that's just been Portland's DNA through this, Orlando's DNA through this tournament. So can your defense do enough to keep you in the game and at least give you a chance? But to me, this comes down to who scores the first goal. If Orlando scores the first goal, they absolutely have a chance to see this game out. If Portland scores it, Orlando's got an incredibly difficult task trying to come back. So that's what I'm looking for in that game. And then Europa League, the second round of quarterfinals. Wolves Sevilla. Sevilla took care of Roma in one of the more balanced, more interesting matchups of the quarterfinals. Round of 16. So now they get Wolves. Wolves lost Johnny. It's been announced for the season. Their wingback, which is a big deal for this team just because they play such a specific system. And they have guys that do such a specific job, and he's one of those guys. Ruben Vinagre was the one who replaced him in that last game when he got hurt. I would assume Vinagre is the one that starts in his place against Sevilla. It's not a massive, catastrophic blow to Wolves. They've got other people that are capable of doing this job. They're fairly deep, particularly when you're just trying to replace one or two guys. But Johnny's been a staple of this team, that back five, back three, whatever you want to call it, with the three center backs. Him and Matt Doherty have been really, really solid, and they're just the five guys that you're going to throw out there every single game. So it's something to take note of. I wanted to mention. And then Shakhtar Basel. Basel took care of business. This is going to be sort of the last lower profile league team standing. I like Shakhtar to go through. I don't really have too much to say about this one, but wanted to at least mention the Johnny injury and acknowledge the fact that Europa League is going on as well. And now we get to the good stuff. Wednesday, August 12th. The Champions League quarterfinals. And we'll just get it out of the way now. Nashville is also playing Dallas in Frisco. This is part of MLS's attempt to create a balanced schedule and continue their season after MLS's back tournament. They've rolled out the schedule of how they're going to do this. And part of that involves Nashville and Dallas playing each other twice to make up these games that they've missed, not being able to participate in Orlando. So, who knows what to expect? These teams haven't played in a while. It's just going to be a wild, unpredictable event. But MLS regular season is officially returning on August 12th, tomorrow. And then we get to the Champions League. Before we talk specifically about Atalanta PSG, I want to run through just some things about the quarterfinals that I found interesting that I mentioned in my piece for 110sportsmedia.com. Two teams, Champions League quarterfinals for the first time in their history. That's Leipzig and the aforementioned Atalanta. 3 of the 8 teams remaining, Bayern, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, have reached a European Cup final of some sort before. Only Bayern and Barcelona have ever won one. So 6 of your 8 teams would be champions of Europe for the first time if they win. Lewandowski, as I said, has been as good as anybody in this tournament. He's got 13 goals in the Champions League. That's 7 more than any other player. Gabriel Jesus, Raheem Sterling, Memphis Depay, Serge Gnabry have 6. Barcelona made the quarterfinals for the 13th consecutive season. The second longest current streak is Manchester City with 3 straight quarterfinals appearances. That's how consistently good Barcelona have been in this competition, and what happens when Juventus and Real Madrid get knocked out in the round of 16. Atalanta, we talked about the goal scoring, 98 goals in 38 Serie A games. That's 2.58 per game. Only Bayern and Manchester City scored more in their domestic season, but PSG actually scored 2.77 goals per game. Now, it's against League One opposition, which is not as good as Serie A, but they actually did score more goals per game than Atalanta, which I wanted to at least acknowledge. Then you've got the injuries. It sounds like, and JJ mentioned this, Josip Ilicic is probably out for Atalanta. Mbappe, it sounds like he's actually going to be on the bench and try and play, and the same thing goes for Mario Icardi. I don't think either of them start. But PSG all of a sudden looks much more likely to go through with the way that these injuries have shaken out, because Mbappe was supposed to miss this game with his ankle. Atalanta is acting like they're both going to play. We'll see what role they play, but that was the big development recently, is it sounds like Mbappe is going to be able to play in some way. PSG is also without Angel Di Maria through suspension, but Barcelona get Busquets and Arturo Vidal back. I mean, that bench was just a bunch of youth guys in the round of 16, that second leg. So Barcelona's got some depth back. But no Titi, no Ousmane Dembele, and Manchester City's going to be without Sergio Aguero for the rest of this tournament, it sounds like. Last couple things on a broader scale. 4 of the last 6 Champions League winners did not win their domestic league. The only 2 teams remaining that won this year were Bayern and PSG. So, trend says somebody other than them win, which is I find quite interesting. And then finally, this is the second time in 6 seasons 3 countries have had multiple teams make the quarterfinals. It last happened in 2017-18, and none of those countries got 2 teams in the semis. So we'll see how this shakes out. But trend tells you somebody other than Bayern and PSG win, and we don't have 2 teams from the same country reaching the semifinals. But this is a new year. We'll see what happens. Specifically to Atalanta PSG, I wholeheartedly agree with what JJ said. This is the most interesting matchup of the quarterfinals to me. I think Atalanta absolutely feel like they have a chance, and you just got to be good in one leg. And particularly for a PSG team that's not great defensively, if you get into a high-scoring game where both teams are knocking in multiple goals, who knows what happens. And particularly if you can build an advantage, because it's not like Ilicic is the only guy scoring goals for this team. If you can get ahead and force PSG to be uber aggressive when you bring on an Mbappe and an Icardi, assuming they don't start, Atalanta can absolutely do this. I love the way that this bracket shook out for them. I think they absolutely can make the final. This is a really cool story. It's got bigger implications for the soccer world, like JJ mentioned in our interview. Really, really excited to get this thing going. That's all we have for today. As I mentioned, both my MLS preview and Champions League quarterfinal preview are up on 110sportsmedia.com. Be sure to check those out. Chris Brown is coming up in less than an hour with Around the Bases right here on 110 Sports Live. Josh Molnix, as always, will be back tomorrow with his show. That's all we got for Touchline Talk today. Enjoy the Champions League. Enjoy the Europa League. Enjoy MLS is back. Cup, tournament, whatever you want to call it, final. And we'll be back Thursday to talk all things Champions League, get you ready for the rest of the quarterfinals. You won't want to miss it. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you Thursday.